Welcome to If These Walls Could Talk. I'm your host and super CEO, Lindsay Liu. Joining me today is Carol Walsh. Carol has been in the real estate industry for over 20 years, starting in commercial building projects and then as a senior administrator for bankruptcy and court-ordered case administration. For the last 8 years, she has been a realtor. And since it is spooky story season, Carol was the perfect person to invite on for a Halloween-themed episode. Today, we talk about selling haunted properties and the tale of Brookdale Lodge, a historic gem nestled in the redwoods. Carol, thanks for joining us.
I'm so excited to be here. I love talking about this property. It's one of those really kind of funny life things that you see once in a while come at you. But I want to set the story because this property is in a little tiny town called Brookdale that is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And back in 1907, a guy named Judge Logan built like a lodge there. Now, that lodge sort of over time turned into sort of a ramshackle cabins and all kinds of other little accessory structures, we'll call them, around the property. And as you started to go into times like 1920s, 1930s, you started to have the Prohibition, you started to have the mobsters, you started to have all these amazing characters showing up at this place. And everybody from Herbert Hoover to Mae West to even more just crazy types of people you wouldn't even think are in the Santa Cruz Mountains were up at this place. And so it had this sort of legendary speakeasy vibe. And then there's all these stories that started over time connected to people who had died at the property, starting with the little girl of the original owner. Now, she's the ghost that people talk about the most in all their different sightings. And apparently she fell in this creek that runs through the actual building and hit her head and died. And apparently she is the one floating around that a lot of people see and hear, like tricycles, girls riding through the halls. Apparently her nanny or her mom is also sometimes spotted walking around in a white dress looking for her. So those are kind of the first early ghosts. And then over time, supposedly, according to these people who believe in such things, which I'm a little bit, there's 49 ghosts that live on this property. And, I haven't seen them, so I can't say for sure. But my dad, when I was a little girl, he had a band in Santa Cruz, and they played there. Like all the bands kind of did their tour through the 70s and 80s in this place. So I kind of knew it as a kid growing up. And so it was very funny that as an adult, we got appointed by the county to take over this property. It had been basically partially burnt. There had been insurance fraud. It had become sort of the place for all the bad stuff to go down. And so the county said, okay, that's enough of this. Appointed our office. And so we took over managing it. And the first thing we did was try to get people to stay there to keep it from being, broken into. And we had a hard time keeping people there because they would come back and they would just be like, I can't hang. I can't do it. Like, it's too much.
I have so many questions.
Yeah. So it's one of those places that's kind of legendary in Santa Cruz. And there's a wonderful website. I cannot recommend it. I want to make sure I get it right because it's really super awesome. And it's this woman who wrote an entire book about this subject. She has a website and it's called the Santa Cruz Ghost Directory.com. And I highly recommend it. It's not just Brookdale Lodge that's on there, of course. She has ghost stories for all over, but she has a wonderful, long explanation of all the different ghost stories pieced together through newspapers and all these other firsthand accounts that are really interesting.
So this lodge at one point was like a luxury destination, it sounds like, right? Like in the early days?
Uh,
Or how did it, yeah, how
yeah.
did it attract all of these people?
So, at the time, Santa Cruz in like the early 20th century was kind of a getaway from San Francisco. And you could take the train into the mountains. And so that's what a lot of people did. For our Bay Area watchers who are thinking you can take a train from San Francisco into the Santa Cruz Mountains, I know, it hurts my heart, but yeah, all kinds of people came there. Some of like really historical people. Obviously, Teddy Roosevelt was up there. He had a lot to do with the forming of the big park that's not nearby, um, and it just kind of became one of those little getaways where people would go into Santa Cruz. And so at the time, it was fancy, right? And they also had this indoor pool, which they called and then a attached room called the mermaid room. So you could look at people swimming. And some of the ghost stories are of people in the pool looking back the other direction and seeing people and then getting out and them not being there. So there's mobster stories about tunnels that were apparently underneath there. Obviously, a lot of bootlegging went on in the Santa Cruz Mountains during the Prohibition. So entirely feasible.
I would not be surprised if there were some tunnels and maybe some people that did disappear.
Yeah. And there's that. And then there's apparently lumberjacks in this area. People are cutting down the redwoods and they're building America, basically. And so there's a lot of lumberjack cabins around here where apparently lumberjacks were fighting and killing each other. And, those cabins are part of the property. So, you might be staying in a lumberjack cabin where they did lumberjack things.
That's amazing. And the 49 ghosts, is that the number of people that have been reported to have died there, or the souls that chose to stay?
It's way more than what's documented, right? In terms of people who are known to actually die there.
Mm-hmm.
But, people over the years, all the famous psychics and all the different ghost people who talk with them have gone there, and that's what they maintain. They basically say there's some people there who are like kind of just busy doing their thing and they're kind of happy and they're not really like bad ghosts. And that's what a lot of the people that we talked to said. It wasn't like they always felt like, ooh, like this is bad. A lot of times it was just playful. It wasn't, it was literally kind of like the TV show Ghosts, and sort of you have different motivations going on, and some of them are a little more playful and others a little more cranky.
Okay, a little bit more ghosts, a little less shining. All
Yeah.
I'm envisioning is
Yeah. I mean, there's when I read through the stories and the accounts, most of them are not the kind of shining encounters. There's really only a few involving like doors shutting or somebody being pushed, things like that. It's not so much that. It's really people seeing people a lot in the spaces. The Brook Room is an amazing piece of architecture. So, just to kind of give you a vibe, it's kind of this chalet thing, right? It's this 3-story open beam room, and there's a creek running through it. And so
that on its own is amazing.
It's architecturally, it's really beautiful. And I've done a lot of research on it for some of my historic preservation stuff, just for fun, as an example of some of the historic structures around Santa Cruz that fascinate me. And so that is still there. Like they built that room. It hasn't really changed that much over time, but it's not open right now because it really got worked pretty hard over the years as sort of subsequent owners went down. And, it's a tough spot, right? The Santa Cruz Mountains is not the beach. And so over time, things kind of changed and it became more run down in the 70s and 80s. Santa Cruz was the murder capital of the United States. I don't know if you know that, which is kind of a fun fact.
Just to add to the spookiness.
Just to add, so the Santa Cruz Mountains had kind of a real funky vibe going on. Yeah, and I mean, I was born in 75 in the mountains, grew up there. I love it up there. Love my peeps. But the mountains are a little different. Mountains are a little different than the beach. So
mountain people.
It's a challenge, but people love it because of the redwoods. And so you go up there to commune with that. And that's some of the stuff that they talk about, is that it was previously Ohlone land and that there could possibly be an Indian burial ground or some other negative energy force that could be affecting all of this. Again, take your pick on what you think the motivation might be of the spirits who might be hanging out.
Well, I did quickly Google it, and when you look up Brookdale Lodge, the first things that come up are which rooms are haunted. And a bunch of different stories around it. Yeah, it's a whole thing. So you can stay there now. It is back and operational. So you all turned it around. It sounds like you were able to kind of get the property back into new owners' hands.
We basically were in the stop it from being used for illegal activity and try to stabilize it. At the time, there was a whole part of the roof that was open. So we were really there to just stabilize and then safety, right? Because code enforcement, and then figure out how to get a new owner to buy the property so that they could take on the process of actually getting it back up and running again. And so that, we went through that process, and it took a couple of years to get there. Banks involved, fraud involved, all the things. So it takes a while to work through that. But a gentleman who owns some other hotels in town ended up buying it, and he's still at it, and thumbs up to him, right? Like, it's a challenge. This is a challenge to take on, and it really needed somebody with some passion. He seems to have that and has continued. It's been, my trustee retired 8 years ago, and it was quite a bit before that when the case actually closed. So, he's been going at it for probably a good 15 years now.
Did you ever stay there overnight?
No, I didn't. You know what? It's funny. We used to laugh about that, my boss and I, because I would have to go up and do like site visits and stuff like that, because we were preparing budgets. We had to get money to stabilize things, do all this stuff for the court. And so I went up there and met with one of the caretakers. And I mean, the one guy hung out. So the one guy bailed, he couldn't hang. But the one guy was like, I'm good. Me and the ghosts, we worked it out. It's all fine, right? Like, I was
just
got
people to talk to. Respect. I'm not lonely.
Right? I was just like, respect, So yeah, no, he was awesome. And it's just it's really a hub. I mean, Brookdale is a tiny little itty bitty place, and it really is just around this lodge.
Amazing.
So if the lodge, died, it was kind of like the rest of the little town kind of dies too, and that would be sad.
So it was important to rehabilitate it and get it back up and running.
Yeah, it's important. It's one of those important pieces to the community. Like I said, I have memories there. So many people do of growing up and going there for different events and music and stuff over the years. And so you do want to see that preserved in some way, adapted to some kind of a reuse. But it's a big project to take on. And I know that he still is struggling to do things like get that Brook room back open, because it's a huge, it's a huge draw, but you have to make it safe. And once you touch a historic, California has actually a special historic building code that allows you some flexibility, but not that much. And so trying to get up to current code in terms of use as a hotel for that space, I'm sure is a challenge, but I wish him all the luck,
I'd like to stay there. Now I'm intrigued.
Yeah, right? I mean, if ghosts are your thing, this is kind of like people are into it, I don't
They must
know.
get an interesting clientele these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, again, I think it's a really interesting cross section of America, actually. I mean, a lot of people travel there. When I was researching it for my architectural history class, um, I mean, I was looking around. There's a YouTube video with a song about Brookdale Lodge, which is pretty funny. Yeah. So
It's part
there's,
of the pop culture
yeah,
lexicon. Yeah.
it's kind of like it has its own whole thing that more people know about it than you would think for such a tiny place in the mountains, right? Like
Wow.
it's really interesting, but you know, I lived in a house when I was about 11 or 12 over in Santa Cruz that had a ghost. And he was pretty chill. He liked to play tricks and move things and make one room really hot and make the other room really cold. Um, he had died in the house of natural causes, and he had built the house, and he just didn't really seem intent on leaving.
He loved
And
the house.
he loved the house, and so of course, as young Gen X kids, we of course got the Ouija board out and went out to the garage. We were renting this house. My dad was at the time, and the garage was locked. We weren't supposed to be in the garage, and we went in the garage and worked
Uh-oh.
our way in there and set up the Ouija board and just proceeded to scare the crap out of ourselves. So I didn't go in the garage again, and that was kind of it for me in terms of living in a house that actually
And
felt
then you
like
were
it
like, I
had a
didn't
spirit.
stay in the Brookdale Lodge. I didn't
I'm
need to.
I'm good.
Good.
I felt like I did that already, and so yeah. I mean, I find it such an interesting question, and so it's real estate is intertwined with who we are, right? And if this is really a thing, I can understand why you don't want to leave, right? Or maybe if like ghosts, you're just stuck there, right?
Or you're
Uh,
stuck. Yeah.
or you're just stuck, right? I don't know. It's really interesting though. But I would say if you haven't ever been up to the Santa Cruz Mountains, it's totally worth checking out. It's really, really beautiful up there. There's all kinds of amazing parks to go hiking around in.
Amazing. Well, I can see why all of those ghosts would not want to leave either. They're like, I'm chilling, I'm on vacation all the time.
Right,
I don't need to
right,
leave here.
right. I mean, it's like the chill Santa Cruz vibe, right? Yeah,
It's
I mean, it's really,
incredible.
there's a swimming hole down like the San Lorenzo River runs right through there. And so there's a swimming hole right there where they used to go when they would stay at the lodge. And apparently, three ladies drowned in this swimming hole in their big 1910 outfits. Apparently, they're also still there hanging out at the swimming hole.
All right. So, tour of the grounds and go to all of the places.
Mm-hmm.
Bring your own life vest.
Please, safety first. Safety
Safety
first.
first.
That's right.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Carol, for this spooky, spooky story to share with us today. How can people get in touch with you if they want to talk about other real estate things?
I'm available for all real estate discussions, spooky or not, and they can get a hold of me on my website, which is carolwalshrealestate.com. They can also find me on Twitter if they are so inclined at Carol Walsh Real One, and you can find all my info and links there to get a hold of me.
Amazing. Well, that's today's episode of If These Walls Could Talk. Super is the AI-powered communication and workflow tool for property managers. To learn more about Super, visit us at www.hiresuper.com. To share a story you have for a future episode, email us at hello@hiresuper.com.